everyone. So it's cold and rainy here in New Jersey, so I figured I'd talk about the history of my Cobra R, the buying process I went to get it, and the specific history of this car. I'd always known about the 2000 Cobra R. It's one of two cars I'd always wanted, this and my Viper. So ever since it was new, I knew about the car. I thought it was just an amazing car. It was very capable at the time. Even today, it still is. And the idea of a factory hot-rodded Mustang was just an awesome idea. You don't have to do anything to the car because pretty much everything's modified in the car from the factory. So I had always wanted one. So obviously in high school, I could never ever have any hopes of affording anything like this, like most people in high school. So it was just something that I had always kept my eye on, and I had always sort of had it in the back of my mind that maybe, you know, if I'm able to one day afford one, I'll start seriously looking into it. Fast forward to about 2011, full-time job, working, making some decent money. So I started poking around looking at these things. I wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm definitely going to buy one. I'm like, all right, let me start doing some research on this car. I don't really know a lot of the ins and outs of the car other than the basic information that's been in magazines. There's no really place to find out all the specific information I need to know, so it's time to do my research because I don't like to impulse buy on stuff like this. There's a lot you need to know. So I started looking at them on cars.com, eBay, Auto Trader, Bring a Trail, all these websites where you see these things for sale. I started looking at them. So at that point, I'd look over every car for sale, read the description, I'd look at the pictures, just to kind of piece together what are the aspects of a stock car, what should I be looking for, what are things that are of concern, what are things that add or subtract a lot of value. So I would go over every car in detail, look at the pictures because I wanted an original car. So as I started looking at these things, I would start to realize quite a few of them had roll cages put in them, diff coolers, custom exhaust systems. A couple of them had forced induction systems put on them. And then I started to find out kind of the Cobra R specific things you really need to look for, like the yellowing of the brake caliper, since a lot of these things got raced. That's the way to tell if the car was raced or not. You would have to look at the damage on the splitter because they sat so low. So I started to develop this picture of what do I really need to know about the 2000 Cobra R. So after going over, I can't even tell you how many, probably dozens and dozens of cars for sale, because these things, even though it's only 300 of them, they do trade hands at a pretty significant rate for there being such a low production car, and you can pretty much always find one for sale. So I would start learning things like, all right, what are the original tires and things like that. Now I had a pretty good idea of the actual car itself, an original hood. A lot of people replace the hoods because with the bubbling issue on the hoods. So I pretty much, after a year or so looking at at a lot of pictures of these things, I kind of knew what I was looking at for an original car, because I don't want one of these like super low mileage cars, only a few hundred miles on it, because you end up paying such a massive premium for a car like that, and you'd end up not wanting to drive it because you pay so much more to have a car that's that clean and original that you don't drive it, and it ends up becoming a garage queen. And I don't drive my cars like a ton. I don't daily drive them at all, but I wanted something that I could not be afraid to kind of drive around, put some miles on it, and I could actually enjoy it, because if you buy a car and let it sit in the garage, you're not really experiencing the car or enjoying it. So I knew what I was looking for, and then I started realizing how special the paperwork was for this car. I had no idea, because they never talked about it in the magazines or anything, all the paperwork this car came with. I mean, yeah, it had the window sticker and your owner's manual, like all the Mustangs came with, and your certificate of authenticity, but you had the dash plaque, you had the postcard that came with, and the biggest thing was the black binder. So I started piecing together information by looking at each car for sale, and I actually put together a Microsoft Word file, and I listed everything I would find, and I would just kind of take notes in it to kind of put together a picture, because there was nowhere to go to, where it had all this information listed. That was part of the motivation for me doing this channel and some of the other videos I've done. It's because there was nobody to ask, really. There was nowhere to go to find out about it. So I started kind of piecing it together myself and just jotting down notes, so I would know for myself what I really need to look for that would add or subtract value to this car. While I wasn't necessarily going to buy one right at that time, like I said, I always wanted this car and this car. Well, this thing came up for sale, and the guy that owned it was kind of in a hurry to sell it, and he was asking a really good price for the car. So I went down, inspected this thing, and the car was almost too good of an offer to pass up, because like they only made 300 of these things. They made even fewer already CR Vipers, and I wanted an ABS car. So I'm like, wow, I really gotta, if I'm ever gonna buy one of these things, I gotta buy it now. And it's a good thing I did, because I still kind of watch these things, and had I not bought this thing, I still haven't seen one for sale come up that was in this nice a condition with this low mileage, because now the prices are kind of exploding on these things a little bit. So I ended up buying this thing in 2012. So this thing went on the back burner for a number of years. I had still kind of watched these things and still kind of piece together the information and kind of see what the sales numbers were, so I would be informed, because I kind of knew eventually I'm probably going to pick one of these things up. So I didn't want to just abandon it. I still wanted to be kind of up to date on the cars and the values of the cars. So fast forward to 2015, 2016, I started kind of seriously looking at these things again. Not like I'm going to go out and buy one immediately, but let's start picking up on the research more aggressively and kind of see where these things are sitting. The prices had come up a little bit. When I was looking at them in around 2011, most of them were selling for $30,000 to $40,000. I was seeing a lot of dealers ask high 30s for them at the time. And the private sales were probably roughly, give or take, in the same area for the kind of condition car I was looking at. So 2015, I think it was, I saw one for sale here in New Jersey, about an hour away from where I live. So I'm like, you know what, it's close by, maybe I'll just go take a look at it. So I give the guy a call. Hey man, just give me a call when you have a minute. I got a couple questions about your Cobra R. Calls me back the next day. Yeah, the car's still for sale. You know, what do you want to know? I'm like, all right, well, what's the condition of the car, number one? You know, has it been wrecked? Is it modified? You know, it looks pretty stock, but he didn't really have that many pictures on it. He goes, the only thing that's been modified on the car is the splitter's been repainted. So I'm like, all right, whatever. He then goes on to tell me how he owns a body shop, and I'm like, oh, right there was like a red flag, because I'm like, something could have happened to this car, and he could have fixed it himself, and it would never show up on the Carfax report. So right then and there, I'm like, I'm probably not going to end up even look at this thing. And then he tells me he doesn't have the black binder. He didn't realize how important it was until after he bought the car. So at that point, I'm like, I'm done. I'm not even going to bother wasting this guy's time. There's too many red flags here. This is not the car for me. So the search continues. Now, about 4 or 6 months later, this guy shows up online in Riverview, Michigan, just south of Detroit and Dearborn. I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to just pop in and look at this car because it's about 10 hours away from me one way. So I'm like, well, the guy had it up for sale on eBay for like one of those, like, it's up for like 3 weeks or something like that. He had it at a really, really high price. I think the starting price he had was $65,000. And I'm like, this guy's asking way too much money. I don't know how serious this guy really is. He didn't have any paperwork pictures, so I'm like, I put it in my saved thing. I kind of watched it as time went on, and it was up for a few days, maybe like a week or so, and then the price started dropping. He started dropping a few thousand at a point every few days. So I'm like, all right, maybe this guy is pretty motivated to sell. He's starting to get into more realistic pricing numbers. So I called the guy, asked him about the car. He was pretty well versed in the car. He knew quite a bit about it. He had quite a few pictures, so I went over them a lot just to make sure the car was stock. He said the car never been modified. He didn't race it. He didn't do anything. And from what I could tell from the pictures, it looked to be true. So I'm like, well, what's going on with the paperwork? You don't have any pictures of it? He's like, yeah, I got all the original paperwork. I'm like, can you send me a picture so I can verify? So he sends me a couple of pictures. He's got the binder, the certificate of authenticity, the dash plaque, the window sticker, and a couple of little Cobra R things. I'm like, all right, this guy's got the bulk of the stuff you need, the really valuable stuff. I'm like, all right. So he was still asking a lot at that point, so this was kind of on the back burner. I wasn't like really gunning for this car at that time. So he keeps dropping it down a little bit more. So I call him back. I'm like, what are you realistically looking to get for this car? Because you're asking a lot more than what these things are kind of selling for. And I sent him actually some recent auction results and some other sold cars on eBay. I was like, most of these are selling in the 40 to 50 range. So he was a little bit more kind of reluctant to come down. He kind of thought the car was worth more than it really was. So I'm like, all right, no problem. I'm like, if you change your mind, whatever you want to do, just give me a call. You have my number. and I just continued to watch it. It started getting towards the end of the auction again, and he kept dropping it down even more. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna call the guy. I'll give him a strong offer. I made him an offer. He's like, all right, you know, I'll keep it in mind. And he wanted to let the auction run its course. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. I totally understand. You want to kind of put some feelers out for the car and see what it's worth. I understand if you know you don't believe me, but you know, here's all the references. I'm not trying to rip you off or give you some scumbag low offer. I offer him very, very fair money. So the auction pretty much got to the end, and I bumped my offer up a little bit. It was a little bit more than I wanted to spend, but the car seemed to be really, really good. It had all the stuff I was looking for, and it seemed to be a real honest car. In the meantime, I found out who the guy was, and I Googled him. I found out the guy worked for Ford Corporate. So I'm like, all right, this guy, he's probably got some connections, because he had worked there for like 30-something years, I found out. I found out he had family that also worked. His sons worked at Ford. So I'm like, all right, this guy's got some pretty strong Ford connections from what I'm telling. So this guy probably, you know, he has a lot of stuff on this car. He knows some good history about this car. Him and his son really knew their stuff about this car. They knew, like, the mechanics of the car. His son was an engineer for Ford. So I'm like, all right. We came to an agreement on the price at the time, and I'm like, all right, you're obviously real far away from me. I can't just drop in and inspect this thing, because I absolutely refuse to buy a car sight unseen. You're opening yourself up for too many problems. I want to inspect it myself. There's things I want to check. I'm not buying a sight unseen, because it's, you know, if I get the car and there's something I miss and there's a problem, now I'm screwed. So I'm not doing that. So I'm like, all right. We came to an agreement on a price. I got to inspect this thing first. I can't just mail you a check or whatnot and have a truck come pick it up. So I had a day off from work, jumped in my car. Me and my father drove 20 hours there and back. From the time we left New Jersey to the time we got back was under 24 hours to just south of Detroit. Drove there. I inspected the car. So I talked to my neighbor who's a car dealer about what are some things I should just look for in general. Things. I grabbed his paint depth gauge. I grabbed all the notes I had ever put together about Cobra R's with me. I was like, I'm going to inspect this thing up and down and make sure this is right, because I'm out paying this guy really good money for this car, and I want to make sure he's representing it correctly. So I go and inspect the car. The car is beautiful. It seems to be everything I'm looking for. I have my cheat sheet with me. I'm going over everything, what are problem areas to look for. I can't find a thing wrong with the car. It is beautiful. It's well maintained. It lived its life in a garage. There's not a speck of rust on the thing. This is the real deal. It's beautiful. I was really happy. I got the hood open, and I'm looking at it, and I noticed one of the fender bolts where the fender bolts down under the hood, because when they put the cars together and then they spray them, so there's no reason to move one of those bolts unless you take the fender off, like it's got hit, it's an accident. So right there, I'm like, oh crap, this thing's been hit, it's been taken apart, shit, like now I'm screwed. Now I'm not gonna end up buying this thing because it's been apart. But luckily I had that paint depth gauge with me. So I was like, look, has this thing ever been hit in an accident? This is moved. He goes, honestly, I don't know why that's moved. And that's when I remembered this is one of the only Mustangs that ever left Ford with no hood on it. So, whereas with most Mustangs, they completely assemble them and then they paint them, they'll line everything up before they paint it. This had no hood on it when it was painted. So, they might have had to adjust it afterwards. So I went around the entire car with that paint depth gauge and I checked side to side. I checked, you know, this part on this side and the opposite side. And because these are machine painted, not painted by hand, they should be very symmetrical. And the car was absolutely perfect. There was no paint inconsistencies at all. Now, you can't check the hood or the trunk because they're not metal. But all the metal body panels, I checked them. I probably checked 50 points on this car. It was absolutely perfect. It was identical, symmetrically side to side. Now, there are sometimes very, very, very minute differences. I think I found a couple minute differences, but for the most part, if there's one spot in a car that's hand painted, it will come out like that on a paint depth gauge. You can immediately see it. The depth is considerably different, but this car was absolutely perfect. So I'm like, all right, there's no way this car's been repainted. You can't repaint and match factory machine depth like that by hand. So at that point, I was comfortable again. I'm like, okay, this car hasn't been painted. What they probably did was, because it had a hood on, they readjusted it after the hood went on. So the car was perfect. From what I could see, I didn't find any other issues with the car, no condition issues. It was absolutely beautiful. Now let's go inspect the paperwork. I sat down at his table. He brought the binder over and a couple other things, and I just started sifting through it. Yeah, all right, it's got certificate of authenticity, the dash plaque. I had mental notes of like how many pictures it was supposed to have and all the stuff, and I'm sifting through the stuff that he showed me on the internet. I'm like, all right, it looks good. Then he comes with this stack of papers, and I mean like stack of paperwork, and I'm like, what the hell is this? This is a lot of stuff. I mean, like service. There were some service schedules in there from Watson Racing in Michigan, stuff like that. Just some service paperwork, and then the factory stuff came out. Because like I said, this guy had worked for Ford for like 30, 40 years. Lo and behold, yeah, like I said, he worked for Ford Corporate. He had access to Dearborn. He walked this car down the assembly line as he was being built and took all the paperwork that the car came with, the stuff that you can't even fathom getting. I start sifting through this stuff. Factory build sheet, factory checklist, 2 status inquiries of this car from the internal Ford computer, the Cobra R build sequencing sheets. This is stuff that nobody has unless you had access to the factory floor. Him and his son walked this car down the assembly line as it was being built, and he pulled all the paperwork off the car and saved it. I still have all that stuff. My jaw nearly hit the floor when I saw this stuff because I had seen like one build sheet before, and that was it. And I knew what a build sheet looks like from other Mustangs, but like factory checklists, the stuff that you can see in the Cobra R pictures, I was like, holy crap, this is unreal. And the fact that he had access to Dearborn was unbelievable. I later found out that he bought this car for himself as a retirement gift, and that's why he kind of held it in such regard, because this car meant a lot to him. This was like the end of his career. He was working at Ford when they were building the 429, so he had worked for Ford Corporate for a long time, and then having access to Dearborn made, oh my God, what a difference it made with this car. Having all that original paperwork was just, it was unbelievable. I mean, how much stuff he had, it was just, I put it all together in a nice binder in the clear separators, so I have everything nice and protected. Just this stuff is just unbelievable for this car, and that's what sold me. Right then and there, I'm like, all right, now I can justify paying the money for this car, because a lot of people say, oh, it's the super rare, it's the best this, the best that. I can probably say this is probably one of possibly the best documented Cobra R, 2000 Cobra R out there. I mean, I've never, ever in the probably 7 years I've been watching these things pretty aggressively on the internet, never seen anywhere remotely near this level of paperwork for this car. So that's what really sold me on this car, because I like original paperwork. I think it really helped add to the value of these things. It was just, I'll never forget that huge stack of me sifting through it. I mean, I looked at my father, I'm like, this is unreal. I'm like, I can't believe he didn't tell me this when I was talking to him online and going back and forth with our email exchange. I was like, how could you not say this? I mean, how could you not advertise this? This could have added a lot of value and got a lot more buyers interested that you had this level of paperwork. I mean, he even gave me copies of the original bill of sale, which I'll get into the story of that in a couple minutes for this car. So having that stuff, especially as time goes on, these become more of a collector's item. That'll really help add to the value of these things. Now, the story behind this is car number 113. It was always a street car, never raced, always all original. He just enjoyed the car for what it was. And the guy that owned it at the time, he was selling it because he was getting a little bit older now. He was in his 70s, but man, this guy could drive. We went out on the test drive for this thing. He didn't like spin the tires or like go crazy, but he was not afraid to give this thing some gas, man. He was a pretty good driver. Him and his son had done a lot of amateur driving events and stuff, and they were both really good drivers. I didn't go out with the son, but I just went out with the owner. He was a good driver. I was very impressed. For an older man like that, he was not like a little old man driving, 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, obstructing traffic. I mean, this guy, he got on the gas, and he was pretty aggressive with this thing. So, but this being car 113 and him having access to Dearborn, going down the assembly line, watching it get built, he said the first few cars that were built, they actually damaged the firewalls because they couldn't have a hard time getting the engine because the engine was so big. These 5.4 blocks are bigger than the 4.6 blocks. So he saved everything. How he got his hands on the car was he worked with a guy who was number one on the waiting list for a Cobra R at Avis Ford in just, I think it was just north of Detroit, Avis Ford. So he was number one on the list at Avis Ford for the 2000 Cobra R. When he found out the car was only available in red, he didn't want it. He wanted yellow only, period. I don't want red. No problem. So the guy I bought it from came along, and he found out that he was on the waiting list. He said, well, I'm getting ready to retire. I'd like to buy this car for myself. I'll buy the car. they found out if the one guy took his name off the waiting list, he couldn't jump in his place. He would have to go behind the line. So what they did was they bought the car together. So there's two names on the original bill of sale, which I have. That's how they were able to get kind of beat the system with that. They put both their names on the bill of sale. The guy I bought from obviously paid for it. And as soon as it was done, he got the car retitled in his name only. So that's how he ended up with the car. And he had always just enjoyed the car for what it was. And shortly after picking up the car from Avis Ford, he realized there was a crease in the hood. So he's like, oh, I gotta do something about that. Because he had worked for Ford forever, he went to one of the facilities that had the hoods, because they didn't have the hoods put on at Dearborn. And he knew everybody there, so he drove the car back to the factory where they had the hoods. It was either Roush or MSX. And they replaced the hood on the spot. They took the original hood the car came with off, and they took another original 2000 Cobra R hood from the batch of ones they had lined up for the other cars. They took one off, put it on this car. So this has even though it's technically not the original hood to the car, it's an original 2000 Cobra R factory hood, and you would never be able to tell that it was changed, other than you could tell that the bolts, you could tell like there was a wrench put on the bolts on the hood, but other than that, you would never be able to tell. So that's how he got his hands on this car and what he had to do. And I had him document all this for me. I had him sign the paperwork, sign and date it, saying the story of how he got the car. And that's pretty much it. So I drove to Detroit and back in less than a day, checked the car out, inspected it. I took the title and all the paperwork with me. I left the car there for about a week, and my neighbor's a car dealer, so he had access to different shipping companies. I mean, I could have just called one of the big shipping companies, but it was a lot of money to have him ship the car. So he has a bunch of people he networks with about that, so I got the car shipped at a really good price in an enclosed trailer. Once we found somebody who was willing to do it, within a day the guy picked the car up, and lo and behold, it got dropped off a couple days later after that. So I took pictures with the original owners because I was really wanting to preserve the history of this car and all the original paperwork. And the car has been an absolute blast to own, and I highly recommend it. I really enjoy this car. It's a ton of fun to drive, and it's got a lot of great history behind it. So hope you enjoyed the story of my Cobra R. And if you're looking for one of these, check out my other videos. All that information and research I pieced together, I used in my other videos to help people kind of understand what to look for in buying one of these. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.